You may feel like your world is falling apart, like everything is going wrong, but that doesn't mean that God isn't moving. Sometimes God uses those circumstances to position you where He needs you to be for your calling. Join me today as we start the series on the life of Joseph to find how God used his circumstances to position him to where he needed to be to save his family. Thank you for joining Refining Grace, where we study the Word of God to become refined, strengthened, and full of God's grace. In Genesis 37, we see where God gave Joseph his dreams, the dreams that showed Joseph his calling, that he would be different than his brothers. This dream gave Joseph a glimpse of what God had in store for him, what God was calling him to do. It did not show Joseph what he would have to endure before he would be able to walk in his calling. God will give us the calling or vision, but He doesn't always reveal the process. Trusting the process can be a struggle. When we do, we will be equipped with what we need to fulfill that calling. Not only did Joseph have favor in God's eyes, but he also had favor in the eyes of his father Jacob. You see, Jacob loved Joseph because Joseph was the firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. Jacob had worked many years to be able to marry Rachel, but Rachel had died in childbirth of Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin. Jacob made Joseph a coat of many colors. These colors were probably blue, red, purple, maybe green, yellow. The Bible doesn't really say, but when it's talking about colors, it's talking about those colors that are hard to get, something his brothers wouldn't have been wearing. You see, these colors were made for people who were in high authority or were usually royalty, but Jacob had it made for Joseph. This did not make his brothers happy because of what these colors meant. They were saying that Joseph had authority. But I believe that Jacob had a feeling that God had a special calling for Joseph's life. It wasn't just that he was the son of Rachel, but God knew that there was something special in Joseph, that Joseph would be used to save his family. Joseph had a total of 11 brothers. There was 10 older brothers and one younger brother. The 10 older brothers worked hard. They worked in the field with the animals. They were shepherds. They did whatever Jacob needed. They'd done everything for their father since they were young. They seen Joseph as spoiled. They didn't see that the favor that Joseph had was from God. They believed that Jacob loved Joseph more, and this wasn't the case. They couldn't see that God had something different planned for Joseph. They couldn't see God's plan was for their benefit. When Joseph had his dream, his first instinct was to tell his big brothers. This shows that, like most little brothers, he looked up to his big brothers. Joseph was excited about the dream. Probably didn't understand all of the dream, but he knew that it was special. He knew it wasn't an ordinary dream. I'm sure Joseph had heard stories of how God had come down and talked to Abraham, how he talked to Isaac. I'm sure Jacob told him the stories of how he wrestled with God and how he wouldn't let go until he got his blessing. And that's why he now walked with a limp. Joseph had probably heard all these stories, and he was just waiting for God to talk to him. Why wouldn't God talk to him? He'd talk to his dad, his grandpa, his great-grandpa. Kids have a way of expecting the unexpected. That's why Jesus said to come as a little child. Jesus wants us to expect the unexpected. God didn't fail Joseph, and He won't fail us when we expect that. God spoke to Joseph in a dream. Dreams would play a big part in Joseph's life later on. In Joseph's first dream, he and his brothers were out binding sheaves of wheat or barley. They would pick up the sheaves and they would bind them together when they were big enough, and then they would place them on the ground. And in this dream, Joseph's sheaves stood up straight. Then his brothers, she saw 11 of them, stood up and they started bowing to the ground. When Joseph told his brothers this dream, his older brothers this dream, they were not happy. They were like, well, what, are you going to reign over us? Are we going to be bowing down to you? They were already jealous of him. They were already believed that he was spoiled and the chosen child. And now Joseph is having dreams and telling them that they're going to bow down to them. What audacity Joseph must have had, they were thinking. Joseph's second dream was about the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. And in that dream, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars bowed down to the ground to Joseph. When Joseph had this dream, he went to his brothers, but his father was there also. And his father scolded him a little bit and said, me and your mother are going to bow down to you and your brothers? Come on, Joseph, think about this. But it also says that Jacob hid that in his heart. Jacob knew what God could do. God had changed his name to Israel by this point. He had got his blessing. So he held it and was wondering, what's God doing? His brothers also held it, but they used it to harbor hate. When God calls us, those around us may not always see what God is showing us. They may not understand it. Like Joseph's brothers, they may be envious. They may be jealous. They may think, why you, not me? Or they may just think you're a little crazy. Joseph did not receive support from his family. He received opposition. But it was this opposition that God was going to use. Jacob, or Israel, one day sent Joseph to check on his brothers to see how they were doing. His brothers were working in the field, and Jacob wanted to check up on them. As he was coming, his brothers seen him first, and they started to conspire against him. Some of them wanted to kill him. They wanted to kill him, throw him in the pit, take that coat, and say a wild animal had killed him. One of his older brothers, Reuben, stood up and said, let's just throw him in the pit and leave him and go on from there. Reuben's plan was to go back later and save his little brother. He didn't like him, but he didn't want him dead either. So they took him and they threw him in the pit. And then they sat down and had a lunch. As they were eating, they seen a caravan of Ishmaelites coming. As they seen this caravan coming, Judah stood up and spoke and said, what profits us if we slay him? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. He went on to tell them that they were his brothers and they couldn't lay a hand on him. He said, we can't touch him. He's our brother. Let's just give him to the Ishmaelites and go on from there. We can sell him, make a little profit. Come on, guys. Killing him is not going to do us any good. Reuben planned to save Joseph in secret, but Judah stood up and spoke out to save his little brother. Judah was compelling them by using what they would gain. But Judah didn't realize that the profit wasn't in what they were going to get from the Ishmaelites. The profit was how God was going to use Joseph to save them. This was meant for Joseph's harm. It was meant to teach him a lesson, to teach him that he was getting too big for his pants and he needed to be knocked down. But God was using this to position Joseph where he needed to be. You see, Joseph needed to be in Egypt to save his family. Not just his family, but all those in that area of the world. There was a famine coming, and Joseph needed to be in Egypt so he could save them, so that God could use him to provide food when there wasn't going to be food. Sometimes things happen to us, and they look like it's for our harm. It looks like there's no good that can come out of it. What good could come out of being sold into slavery by your brothers? But it's amazing what God can do, how God can take those things that's for our harm and turn it for our good and for the good of those around us. So don't look at those circumstances that seem harmful. Trust God in those circumstances. Wait and see how God is going to use what you're going through for your good and for the good of those around you. Because God can do amazing things. What you're going through may be for your good. What you're going through may just be positioning you where you need to be. So just keep your trust in God. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Follow me as we continue in the life of Joseph. If you enjoyed it, subscribe so it's easier to follow. May God bless you and keep you. May He make His face to shine upon you and give you peace.